Attention, all game stoppers. We need your help answering some questions that we cannot wrap our head fully around, specifically revolving XRT and the deep plumbing of how these shorts are actually being managed through this system. First off, we're going to a DD written by PyFi a few months ago.
So excellent, DD. If you haven't already read through it, by all means read through it. And in this, basically, PyFi talks about, or one of the things that he talks about, is the ETF redemption process. The best understanding that I think the average person who follows GameStop has is they're vaguely aware of the concept of synthetic shares, and somehow along the lines, people think, well, is it a real share? Is it a synthetic share? And that's probably not the right way to think about it. And I'm not clever enough to address those issues one way or the other, but I am slightly clever enough to think, okay, well, listen, walk me through the accounting. Might as well use my degree to actually do something useful here, but like walk me through the accounting of how these things are actually booked. So basically, I want to see T accounts of how these things are created. Anyways, Josh, within that, if you want to share your screen here, there was a letter that was filed to the SEC circa late 2015, early 2016.
All right, so the first quotation. Here, there are 9.8 million shares claimed to be owned above shares outstanding plus reported short interest. These security positions were not owned by the sellers, so they were not short sales, but they did not get reported as short sales. The thing that is very important here is someone was short XRT, but it was not reported. There was no reportation of this ever in any sort of documentation. So what does this mean? There could be a circumstance where you have no clue how many XRT shares there are. This can be translated to any stock. Of course, we are talking about GME, but a lot of the ways that these guys are going short is through XRT. This XRT has been very scammadocious.
And if you can see my really shitty drawing here, assuming you can still hear me, see right here on the owner side, someone thinks they own shares of XRT. But as Josh, as you just say, if you have, in this case of the report, what was it, 9.8, a little less than 9.8, the liability is not being booked on the short side. That is to say, someone has sold something. In other words, if you sell something short, you get cash for the short sell, but you also have to assume the liability because you have to say, okay, listen, I will pay you back these shares at some point in time or whatever, right? But if you're not recording that on your balance sheet, you're recording the asset, well, that's a great position to be in because it just props up your balance sheet. And moreover, if it goes back into the person who owns the shares, so let's say like Josh, you buy 100 shares of XRT or whatever, right? Or just pick anything or whatever. And you report it, and it's shown on your books, your brokerage account, whatever, as an asset. But if the corresponding liability is not booked somewhere, that is a serious problem. And Josh, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but if you go to the next page.
On the next page, another quote. These excess owners represent undisclosed delivery liabilities at clearing firms and too big to fail institutions, which likely require settlement liquidity that is not readily available in a crisis market. The XRT is a clear example of a settlement risk that exists today and is undisclosed by the XRT operator. Here's what this is saying, that there's a bunch of risks in the system because people think that they own XRT, but it is not showing up on the liability side of their balance sheet. But I mean, that's just, we're kind of talking jargon here, but basically what that means is you think that you own XRT, but XRT does not show that they have you owed.
You will own XRT. Don't think that you're not going to get delivery of your shares of XRT. Okay, right? It's just it's just being kicked around. It's like almost like kiting a check in a sense in the system. The big thing is that, and this gets back to something we said before. It's like, when will this nonsense stop? Or what actually constrains the shorts? What actually constrains the balance sheet? Well, I guess the simplest answer to that is truth. Actually recording your assets and your liabilities accurately and truthfully, that constrains your balance sheet. If you're just going to blatantly lie, or if you're not going to intentionally lie, if you're not going to lie through commission, but you lie through omission, it's still the same net effect because you have these balance sheets which look much better than they actually do look. And the real effect of this is that you have this shadow leverage that occurs because let's say that you're a primary dealer for one of these guys that goes short or whatever, right? You say, okay, listen, these are the ratios you've got to maintain or whatever, right? But at the same time too, if you keep going short and short and short and you don't record the fact that you go as short as you are going, this is going to factor back up where you're going to look much better than you actually do look.
When your balance sheet means everything. And if you have an unreported section of your balance sheet, then therefore you can leverage that up unlimitedly because it is not reported on your balance sheet. I mean, we talk about these off-balance sheet exchanges a lot. This is mainly through these repo bilateral agreements, but this is another way that they were doing this. A point, they are talking about this that was happening in 2011. That was happening over 10 years ago. To think that this is not being brutally managed, not just in XRT, but probably many different ETFs across the board, it is just extremely criminal to say the least. And why would it stop? Because let's say you are an unknown Mayo enthusiast usually a Chicago-based firm. If you do fit the category, and you know if you're buddies with the owner of XRT, you give him cash like under the table, and he will do whatever you want because he doesn't care. He's getting paid so much, it doesn't matter. The laws don't matter until someone calls the bluff. So this will continue until someone calls their bluff. And what is going to prevent that? Let's reread a small portion of this line again. These excess owners represent undisclosed delivery liabilities at clearing firms in too big to fail institutions, which likely will require settlement liquidity that is not available in a crisis market. That means that there is too much liquidity out there that will not be able to be filled if we go through an illiquid point or a extreme crisis. I mean, this was a problem in 2011. I mean, I can think that this would just be exacerbated at extreme levels today. Problem where I have is I don't understand completely the balance sheet sides of this situation. To me, it is tough to wrap my head around because it is all happening on a ghost ledger.
You have assets that need to be offset by a liability.
Is it the?
It'd be retail. No, it'd be retail. It'd be anyone who owns XRT. Anyone who owns XRT. Yeah, just anyone.
Is it not the short sellers? Because it seems like the short sellers are the ones who are the undisclosed liabilities.
Yeah, exactly. Like you and I would own the assets of like having think we bought XRT or whatever, right? But that's offset by a liability, which is a short.
Liabilities if you sell short.
Yeah, because like if you're selling short, what you do is like the thing you get on that front is you take in the cash, from selling what you don't own short, and you should book it like, oh, I've got to buy back at a future time. Anyways, Josh, 3 follow-up points to this thing. I also note too that, simply put, if there are 5 owners for each XRT share, the additional redemption of those shares can render the existing shares of XRT essentially valueless, with no liquidity left in the shares issued to accommodate additional ownership claims. So let me say this slightly differently. If you look at XRT, I think it's very similar to kind of what's going on with Tether, or at least this is my suspicion, where in order to actually redeem shares of XRT for the underlying, like I want whatever it represents, you have to be an AP, an authorized participant, in order to do so. And there's minimum redemption requirements, whatever, right? But here's the catch. It's just like with Tether. If you want to actually turn in your tethers and actually be redeemed for cash, whatever, right? There's minimum redemption thresholds that retail probably can't make on their own. And plus there's KYC verification. They make it hard intentionally. It's almost like wildcat banking in a sense, but just updated for the modern thing. But either way, let's say you're running XRT, and just numbers on my backside here. Let's say that you also know that no more than 50% of your ownership is actually going to be in a position to ever redeem shares of XRT for the underlying. Well, that's the case. Imagine like running a bank. You run a bank and you know that half your depositors will put money in, but you also know those half depositors will never be able to take their money out. Now you might say, well, Justin, what if I sell my shares of XRT? Great. From the bank's perspective, that's like me saying, okay, Josh, I can't take my money out of the bank, but Josh, I can give you my deposit at the bank. So now it's not in my name, it's in Josh's name. This would be like selling XRT to Josh or whatever, right? But from XRT's perspective, or from the bank's perspective, who the fuck cares? Justin can't redeem, nor can Josh redeem. So
what prevent them would be the redemptions. I mean, the very important part of that line was the additional redemptions of those shares can render existing shares of XRT valueless, because so many people think that they are selling short XRT, but it is undisclosed. It is just in the ghost ledger. So if 5 people are selling short something and there's only 1 share to actually represent that, the only way to really call their bluff is if you are actually redeeming those shares back, which through the ETF. But that's not happening because you need to be an authorized participant to do that. And what incentive? Who actually redeems? It's the exact same Ponzi scheme as Tether, and these are being propped up and extreme criminally is really going on there.
Yep. So Josh, here's a question I've got, like pretty much for everyone else. And like next time if I'm fortunate to talk to Python, this is a question I want to ask him. I can kind of get how you can have more shares of XRT in existence that should be in. Why? Because you're booking the assets, retail owning XRT without booking the corresponding liability. That is, the shorts actually reporting that they're actually short, at least in 2016 by 9.8 million shares, probably more now. Okay, so I get that. I also get the fact that if you were an authorized participant, you can go back to the fund XRT and say, okay, listen, here's my 100,000 shares or whatever the bare minimum is to redeem. Give me the underlying, and the fund will basically do that. What I don't understand is the metrics of how the ETF can create synthetic shares. I get you can create fake shares to redeem from the ETF for reasons that are hard for me to understand, even harder for me to explain, which is this picture right here. I think what's going on, but my understanding is really weak. This is what I need help with right here, is being able to articulate this in a clear, concise manner.
And I mean, we've even talked to PyPhi about this chart specifically, but it still does not fully make sense to us. And the reason why this is so important, because if you can understand how these short mechanisms are working, you can play the cycles better. If you can play the cycles better,
Yeah.
you can increase
Oh,
your total shares, and that could potentially screw the shorts in the long run. So understanding these complex subjects is extraordinarily important to really fully grasp how everything is if you can understand how things are working in the plumbing with regards to GME, it is much easier to make calculated decisions going forward.
yep. One last thing too. PyPhi mentioned it. One of the other quants that helps out PyPhi, and forgive me, I need to give credit, and I just can't remember who did it. They discovered the linkage between puts being rolled in XRT and seeing a GME price spike. And so this gets kind of back to the synthetic share creation. This shows you my own ignorance of how I struggle to articulate what's going on in this. But I do understand the fact that when the put positions are rolled forward, it creates buy pressure on XRT. I think buy pressure on XRT, which in turn forces someone, presumably XRT or whoever owes XRT the shares, to go out and rebuy the underlying. And in process of rebuying the underlying, this is what juices GME. And this also might be a mechanism for how you see these meme baskets run, or it might partially explain. There we go. Might partially explain, what's going on there. But again, like, this is market mechanics. Market mechanics is not my wheelhouse. Like I said, accounting, macro. That's what I like. That's what
So
I'm.
the main thing is, if anybody has a extreme understanding of these subjects, please let us know in the comments, and we would love to have you on the channel where we can actually just have an open discussion about these market mechanics. Or if you know anyone, please have them reach out to us, because this is stuff that I think it would be very valuable if everybody understood.
Yep.
Thank you.
Specifically, somebody who can do T charts. Somebody can do T charts to say, okay, listen, this is where the redemption comes from. These are the various balance sheets that touches. This is a balance sheet, or this is like an error that's being created, and this is how it's ultimately unwound. Like, that's the thing. If you can do a T chart to walk through this entire cycle, you probably understand it.